park. I know you're governed by the Endangered Species Act, and you're operating based upon that. But if you look, you can't alter the natural sheet flow to Florida Bay for one species. And you don't know how many you're going to affect, and you don't know how much seagrass is going to die in Florida Bay. You don't know. When you start altering the natural sheet flow, and I've heard people say, well, not that much water flowed through there. Well, whatever flowed through there needs to flow through there.
Right.
It needs to flow where it wants to flow by gravity, not
About whether we could open those gates if we had the evidence that that would help Florida Bay. I have a legal concern whether we could do that because of the Endangered Species Act and its requirements, what I know about case law. I have a concern whether that would hold up legally.
Wildlife, I'm always talking about the water, but of course, I care deeply about all of God's creatures and all of the wildlife. And so I appreciate you for beginning to give me a deeper understanding of how these historic lands help us to hopefully never, and what we do in the future with Governor DeSantis is help to never drown 98% of animals in the Everglades.
Exceeded their criteria for the Cape Sable Seaside Sparrow, and we were not allowed to move that water over to the west because those levels were higher than the criteria allowed.
For it to be closed. Why such a long time?
Two reasons. The birds start nesting in March, and they'll continue nesting through about June, sometimes into July, sometimes even into August. But when they're nesting, if too much water goes through those gates, it drowns the nest. You know, the eggs, the young, they're drowned and they're gone. So that's a very direct impact. The other reason is too much water across that area will drive the plant community from the muley grass to sawgrass. You know, it'll cause a shift in the plant community. So both of those reasons are important.
Past calls for maximum releases from Area 3 down into Everglades National Park and farther south. So right now, the Corps of Engineers has opened S12C and S12D structures. Those gates are fully open and out of the water, and combined between the two of those structures, they're moving about just over 600 cubic feet per second out of Area 3 down into Everglades National Park. You'll notice on the graphic on the screen that both S12A and S12B still remain closed. That's in concert with the Cape Sable Seaside Sparrow and their nesting and breeding season. So S12A and S12B will remain closed this time of year up until July 15th is when they can be opened back up.
And you know what that's going to look like, how it's going to work. What we would like to do is get to where we don't require any closures on the S12A and B. You know, that's like the North Star. That's what we would like to get to. Commissioner, I think that would deliver what you're saying. You know, let the water find its own way across that landscape.
Yep.
And if we can do that, we'll do it. We absolutely will, where the sparrows are. So, you know, sometimes we hear the sparrows are in the way of opening up the gates and getting water out of 12A. And, you know, there's truth to that. Those two gates, 12A and B, we require that they be closed for 9 months out of the year to keep subpopulation A dry. They can be open 3 months out of the year. That changes a little bit every year. There's some flexibility there. But that's the requirements that we have with the Corps of Engineers, and it's working. It's keeping some small number of sparrows in subpopulation A. But you know, the big problem there is the roadway forms a dam, and that's what we've all been working to get water back through that roadway, through the bridges. And you know, the roadway and its damming effect is what's holding water in 3A.
But if
Larry,
if
what's
you
the
took
population in Zone A while you're talking about that?
You know, the last few years, when they've surveyed there, they've found just a few sparrows, Mr. Bergeron. So the exact number, we can look on the graph again to get an exact number, but typically they're finding, when they survey, maybe they'll find 3 singing males, and every time you have one male, there's probably 8 or 10 other birds there with it. So they don't survey the whole thing, but
What was the population when you started closing those A and B in what, the 90s?
yeah. I think
Okay,
so,
and what was
yeah.
the population then?
Let's look at it, Mr. Bergeron, because there it was, right there. So you just have to look at that blue line, you know, and how it's changed over time. I don't know, you know, I can't say the exact numbers, Mr. Bergeron, but it's the way that blue line has moved up and down over time.
I mean, was there 1,000 or 3,000 or?
Yeah, not 1,000. I mean, you know,
So there was 100 when you started shutting the water flow off, and now through, I guess, 25 years, there's only 3.
well,
From
there's
what
3
I was-
singing males that are being
Three
that
males?
are detected. So there's less. Yeah, there's less birds than.
So it
when
doesn't
we
seem
had
like
it
shutting the
closed.
gates have really
Helped.
helped the population, or?
Yeah, you know, you could say that. I would say that shutting the gates have allowed the population to hang on there.
Does somebody make an analysis after 25 years of shutting the gates and not seeing any real improvement? Does somebody make an analysis to go, maybe we shouldn't have to close the gates because it's such an impediment to other beneficial things we can do?
You know, we've done that analysis, and I'd be glad to get some of that information back to all of you or come talk again, because we've done that analysis, and what it shows is closing the gates definitely creates the drier conditions that the sparrows need.
But
And
they're
if
not
they-
improving. The point is that the numbers counted are not showing improvement. I understand it's drying out that area, but I think it's drying out that area, I think people would agree, to the detriment of other scenarios in an effort to create an environment that perhaps the sparrows will flourish in. But-
To all of us for having the wetland wet and having the seagrass alive. And so we have lost so much seagrass, and that's a carbon problem, a carbon issue that is getting worse and worse and worse for the love of 1,000 birds. And the 1,000 birds has not gone to 2,000 birds. So on one end, there's something really horrible happening, and what's being done for 9 months. So my question, and I'll stop, does it have to be totally shut for 9 months? I mean, that seems so extreme when you consider everything else that occurs because it is shut for 9 months.
And
Well, to
multiply,
provide-
and it's 1,000 birds maybe, right? Because they get a multiplier.
Oh, it's less than 1,000 birds in subpopulation A, for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
There's only about a three bird, or maybe, what,
There's
20
probably-
birds?
I would say there's probably 1 to 200. in
when is
that
the last
entire
time one of these
area.
birds has actually been seen? Not heard, but seen. Somebody laid eyes on it and said,
Modified water delivery. And you know the impacts that are going on with discharges out our rivers, unnatural volumes, and the drowning of 95% of every living animal in the Central Everglades. We started tracking panthers in 1981, GPS coordinates.
Yeah.
We had panthers in the river of grass, 750,000 acres in the Central Everglades, panthers all over the place. Once we started doing this, plus there's other problems too, don't get me wrong. It's
Right,
not just
right,
the 2
sure.
gates.
Yeah.
We haven't had but very few panthers come into that 750,000 acres. And we drowned all its food chain, the whole food chain. Just drowned somewhere around 5,000 deer in the Central Everglades. So it's really critical that we're not got one endangered against the other endangered. But I think when you
done the
fall
studies
back,
that say what happens if you just open up the gates?
the birds drown.
Do
The
they?
nests
Because they're
drown
not,
and the
they don't
birds
seem
drown.
to be there. I mean, my point is just that you're creating an environment in which they will grow, but they don't come and grow. It's markedly different to say we're seeing growth, but you're not. To me, one of the things we do sitting here is we're not allowed to play favorites. We're not allowed to sit here and start favoring certain things and people and interests, markedly over other things.
Yeah.
It is hard for me, sitting in the seat that I sit in, to say that there is any benefit, any measurable benefit at this point, because not only are the gates being closed, but they're closed to the detriment of everything else, except for the sparrow, which the closure doesn't actually seem to be benefiting. And say to myself, we have to do everything to obstruct natural flow of things, to protect a bird that nobody really sees almost ever, to the detriment of all these other species and stakeholders. I think that's, at least from my perspective, where, what it looks like, and nobody can seem to explain to me how the closing of the gates, which we're talking about now, is not theoretically beneficial, is actually beneficial. There's been a quarter century of nothing happening.
So we can follow up and show you the data that shows when they have dry days, the right number of dry days in these marl prairie areas, how the nesting goes up and down with the number of dry days. We've got that information and be glad to follow up and share that with you.
Yeah, I'd like to know how it actually happens, not.
Yeah, we got
how-
data.
So if we had the data for you, if we had the science for you to say that opening those two gates really did bring a positive impact south, what would you do?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that the first thing that we are already doing is trying to find a way to not have any closures on the gates. So we would like to, just say they can be left open.
And I just had a quick question about the marl habitats that you show there.
Yeah.
Are those the only marl habitats, or can you create more marl habitats in areas where maybe the birds could go to another place slowly over time?
I think-
Does that happen within the Endangered Species Act?
Well, I think those are probably the only big marl prairie habitat areas in the Everglades landscape. Subpopulation A that we've been talking about, we believe that if we can keep it dry enough, we can not only maintain it, but improve it as sparrow habitat. Open all the time, we would love to do that. But we've got, conservation paradigms we got to navigate. We've got legal paradigms that we have to navigate. But, one thing that I'll kind of leave this as my last comment. When we were trying to figure out how to move Maud Waters faster, it was kind of like a Gordian knot. And we had the roadway concerns, we had the water quality concerns, we had the Endangered Species Act concerns. But between all the partner agencies, they figured it out, and they did an extremely good job of it. And I'm sure we can do that again, but we just need to work together to do it.